Okay. Again, Division 6 measurement rules. We're doing this in Division 6 right now. There we go. And the reason we're
Hey,
starting
Kevin,
with,
sorry to interrupt real quick, but it looks like somebody in the chat was asking where we're from.
oh, thank you very much, whoever chatted that. That was just a major oversight on my part. Let's back up and do introductions. I'm Kevin Ryan. I'm the state engineer with the Division of Water Resources. And with me tonight is Mike Sullivan, the deputy director and deputy state engineer, and also Aaron Light, the division engineer for Division 6. And as you know, most of you know, we've talked about this before in the in various locations in Division 6. But of course, Aaron is responsible for water administration in Division 6, and part of that is doing responsible administration if there's a call on the river. And so that's why we're interested in this. For various reasons, measuring devices and good data are part of our administration and part of our planning for how we use water in the state. And again, I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But I also want to mention that we have 3 attorneys from the Attorney General's office, Emily Halverson and Katie Duncan from the Federal and Interstate Unit, that will be helping us with this rulemaking. And the reason they're here, as I've said in the past, is that we need to do this right. Rulemaking is a very formal, very legal process. And we want to make sure that as we do this, we have rules that we can all live by. And we do that by getting it right in terms of process. And that's why Emily and Katie are here. We also have Allison Robinette, also from the Water Supply Unit, Water Resources Unit. And she will also be overseeing some of this work that we do. So I apologize for not doing those introductions. And of course, Kelly Romero-Heaney from DNR is here with us tonight. Kelly, did that get to the question, my oversight on introductions?
I sure did.
Yeah, okay, thank you. But again, why measurement rules? We'll talk about that, but why Division 6? We're starting with this in Division 6 because there is a great need there. We have a lot of structures, a lot of diversions without measuring devices, a lot of water rights without measuring devices. And Aaron has started the momentum on this with issuing orders and I think over the last decade, encouraging people to get measuring devices in. And so we do have that momentum. And also, you know, for the West Slope, the need is great in terms of the compact, if there should ever be a compact compliance obligation. And it's for that reason that we're starting in Division 6. But let's just stop real quick and recognize the fact that we do have existing authority in the Colorado Revised Statutes. And it just says that the owners of ditches, et cetera, need to erect proper head gates and proper measuring flumes, weirs, and devices where necessary. That's important, and it becomes necessary, as I said, for administration during a call. And Mike Sullivan's going to talk about that and just give you a little bit more detail on that. But it's important during a call. It's important if we have to do compact compliance administration someday. And many of you have heard me talk in the past that that's not necessarily imminent. We don't see that as being imminent, but we also can't say it will never happen. And, you know, maybe in several years in the future, there's a higher probability that we would need to do that. But the third item is data. The data related to diversions that comes from measurement is important to protect your individual water right, whether it's from abandonment or just to protect the value of it in terms of maybe someday you want to sell the land, sell the water right to a new owner. That data is important. And then lastly, and maybe I just want to put extra emphasis on this, it's important to protect Colorado water users during compact compliance. And if I could drive home one point, again, if Colorado is in a compact compliance obligation situation where we need to work with the other upper basin states to determine what we need to do to meet our obligation to the lower basin states, Colorado is best protected if our obligation is determined based on actual diversion data, not inferential methods, not satellite imagery, et cetera. You've heard me say it before. We want to protect ourselves by having actual data available to that process. And then the question is, if we accept that's why measurement is important, why are rules necessary? If we have that statutory authority and it's already clear, why are rules necessary? Now, I just said the statutory authority is already clear. I listened to a CPR broadcast from somebody that was in the Walden meeting who said the law is vague, it's not necessarily clear. That may be a question of judgment, but certainly where it's not clear, we can establish some consistency and do it in a transparent way as to how we will apply that statutory authority, what the process is. It gives us a chance to recognize all types of diversions ahead of time so that we plan it. We're not dealing with it on the fly. We can look at options and alternatives and get the technical and administrative guidance. And by the way, do exactly what we're doing tonight and what we've done for the last 5 or 6 weeks, and that is get stakeholder involvement. All that leads to more efficient implementation of the need to impose, for lack of a better term, this measurement device need. And with that, Mike, let's have you talk about just the water administration needs a little more.
Okay. We've as we said, we've given this presentation quite a few times in the basin, so we've really kind of shortened it up for folks. Just, you know, we don't want to keep repeating things to folks, but give a little flavor for it for those who haven't been able to make one of the meetings that we have had. We're just noting that in Division 6, there's historically been limited need to do a lot of curtailment. The water years have been good, the snowpacks have been good, but we're seeing much drier times occurring in this drought or climate change or whatever you want to call it. And just noting that we saw it pretty heavily on the Yampa upstream of the confluence of the Little Snake. We saw it pretty a lot of administration needs on the Illinois over on the North Platte. This summer, 3 out of the last 4 years, we've had places where we've had to put calls for water. And calls for water means that we need to make sure that we get water to a senior water right. And we do that by turning off junior water rights, the ones that are younger water rights, so to speak. The value of that water right is in that seniority. That's what everyone will tell you. We'll close those juniors down and make sure we get the water to those senior water rights. We always like to work with users if we can. If we can kind of share the water out and nobody gets hurt, that's great. But in the end, a senior water right can request that we put a call on for water and start going into very active administration. Next slide, please, Kevin. So we did some water administration scenarios during these meetings, and it really turns out if we're going to try and make sure we get the senior water right their water and get as much water delivered to as many water right owners as possible, we really need to have some kind of measurement to make sure we can do that. The scenarios we talked about in the other meetings were a case where there's no measurement, a case where there's some measurement, and a case where there's all measurement. And those cases really revolved around if the senior water is short of water and has a measuring device or doesn't have a measuring device, there's really no good way to go upstream and start turning people off until we have a good feeling for how much water is being diverted and how much that senior is short. If the upstream ones don't have measuring devices, we're not sure how much to curtail. If we do have good measurement on that senior, and we know that that senior is short, then we're going to go upstream and look at the juniors and start cranking them back until we make sure we have enough water at the senior head gate. That's not terribly efficient. If there's a long lag time in the system to get water to somebody, we may be overturning or turning someone off too much who really could have some water because the senior would get satisfied within a reasonable time, but lacking any measurement on that junior, we don't know that there's extra water available for that junior. So that junior could get turned off earlier than needed or more than needed. So the measurement helps us to do the administration. We get the water to the seniors and retain the value for those water rights. But we also maximize the amount of water that's delivered to Colorado water users by getting as much water out to as many juniors as we can possibly do it. That's how the priority system works. It's how we do it all over the state right now. And having measuring structures is key to helping us administer those calls, especially when we're seeing drier conditions or more demands for water, or just general growth in the West Slope and in Division 6, where there's just going to be more and more demand for water. We want to make sure that those priority water rights are delivered to those folks. Kevin, I think it's yours again.
Yeah. Are there any questions so far? Just pause here for a minute. We'll try to go more quickly through this time. Okay, Aaron is going to talk about recording and reporting, but I just want to give you guys a visual. And this has to do with the fact that through our conversations, it's often so much about terminology. And we really have used the term measuring devices, but we talk about alternatives to that. And maybe at the risk of temporarily confusing it, but maybe establishing a standard going forward, we wanted to show a hierarchy. And really what we're talking about in the global sense is measurement methods. Some means to measure the flow or the total volume, but we're usually talking about the flow. So we use this term measurement methods, but measurement methods could be one of two things. It could be measuring devices, and that's maybe a typical flume or a weir or a flow meter, where you're really directly measuring the flow. It's a piece of equipment used to measure the flow there, but there could be an alternative measurement method that we don't want to count out. And the alternative measurement method, just by way of example, could be a power consumption coefficient methodology, or it could be a pump curve. There may be others that we're not looking at right now, but the idea is that this does not directly measure the flow, but in some applications we need to allow for consideration, because a flume may not be doable, may not be viable in a certain location. A flow meter may not work for some reasons. Now that's the more straightforward way to go, but we have alternative measurement methods. And as you'll see in the rules, we've allowed for that. Those two different types of measurement methods. And with that, Aaron, I'm going to let you go ahead and get into the different methods.
Thank you, Kevin. So yeah, let's talk about different methods and measuring devices available out there. In the state of Colorado, the most common measuring device is the partial flume. We do have, when we think about really in general devices that are used throughout the state, we can generalize them into two categories, flumes and weirs, but the partial flume is the most standard measuring device in the state of Colorado and definitely in Division 6. Other types of flumes out there are cutthroat flumes and ramp flumes that are available. And then on the weir end of things, we have V-notch weirs, Cipolleti weirs, and then not mentioned here, which we do see a lot of, is sharp-crested weirs that are rectangular. You can see actually in the photos there that one of those photos represents a partial flume. That's the one on the photo on the left. And then the one on the right is, it looks to me like a V-notch weir. Then another method of measuring is rated sections. We typically don't see rated sections in ditches, but it does occur. Where we see rated sections are at gauging stations, and that's the case with whether it's a USGS gauging station or a gauging station that we operate. So that's the method we use in those sections, is a rated section. And then there's a method that's referred to as a float test, or what we commonly use as chip test. You'll probably hear your water commissioner use the term chip test. It's not a very accurate method of measuring water. However, as many of you on the phone know, we have many structures in Division 6 that do not have measuring devices, yet we try to maintain a record of use of water and diversions of water through those structures. And so what our water commissioners will do, depends on the water commissioner, it depends on the ditch. Some of them will just make a best guess estimate, and some of them will actually run this chip test. And the chip test is run by timing something that floats on the surface, maybe a dandelion head. Just timing how long it takes for that dandelion head to go a specific distance, and then determining a cross-sectional area so that we can estimate the discharge. All right, Kevin, you want to go to the next? Other photos here that we can see of measuring devices. On the upper left there is a Cipolleti weir. Then the lower left is another partial flume. And then the gentleman is standing in the stream there. We call those hydrographers. They're individuals that make stream flow measurements. And that gentleman is making a rated section stream flow measurement. Then you can see in the little drawings there are the different types of weirs and flumes. You can see some partial flumes and then the various types of weirs, the sharp crested rectangular and then a V-notch, and then there's also Cipolleti. The photo there in the center, what I was going to represent, that's fine, Kevin. Each one of these no matter what you're using, whether it's a Cipolleti weir, partial flume, or even a rated section, you need to know the depth. And then the depth can be used to convert the flows into a discharge. And so at these sites, you'll always see a staff gauge that's measured actually in tenths of feet. Now, I know some people may not be familiar with reading these, but if you can actually look closely at that photo, what you'll see is that is actually reading 0.46 in depth. So that's 0.46 feet. And that's assuming that top mark is a 1 foot mark. Okay, Kevin, thank you. Alternative measurement methods, that last slide was really covering primarily measuring devices. A rated section would probably be more considered an alternative measurement method because it's not a permanent structure. But one thing about alternative measurement methods is they're not necessarily measured directly. And Kevin mentioned a couple options for what would be considered an alternative measurement method, being a pump curve or power consumption coefficients. And with alternative measurement methods, they are going to require some assumptions, some calculations, predictable field conditions, and then careful verification by our office as to whether or not they'll meet the standards and requirements under our rules. All right, Kevin. So here we're talking about all these different measurement methods, and it really doesn't make sense to be asking people to begin measuring their water and then not record it and make sure that it's then reported. The reporting aspect's very important, that it be reported to our office. Our office is think of it as the warehouse of all this data. And so when people want to know and understand how water's being used in the state of Colorado or in a particular ditch, they go to our database to find that data. So it's not just the recording aspect that's so important, but it's also the reporting aspect that's important. And this data really is valuable. When we think about water and its value, the value of a water right is based on its beneficial use. And how do we know how much has been beneficially used if we're not measuring it, recording it, and in the end, really reporting it to our office? Because again, pretty much everybody is coming to our database to look for that data and how much water has been beneficially used. Also, recording and reporting the data is really important when it comes to protecting your water rights against abandonment. Just to give you an idea, our abandonment process is just all based on data. It's a data query. We query on how much water is decreed to the structure and how much, and that query then compares it to the amount of water that's being recorded is going through that diversion structure. And again, where it's really critical to measure, record, and report that data. And then measuring your water can also help in optimizing your operations. I've had several people in my years here with the state where I've required people to install measuring devices. I've had people actually express their appreciation that they do now have a measuring device in their structures so that they can better understand just how much water they're diverting. And then just to mention again what Kevin said, it's really important and critically important when it comes to the state of Colorado that we're recording our water usage and accurately doing that. Then last, and I think Kevin mentioned this too, is there's a transparency aspect to recording and reporting your data. Right now, and I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, and I've mentioned this in some of the meetings, is that all of your data, if you're a water user on a ditch right now, you can go onto our website right now and look at all the historic data we have on your ditches. And some of it might be individual daily type readings to annual volumes of water to even comments that are critical in understanding how we've reported use of water under your ditch. And then transparency builds trust in the system and trust in us, and it does enhance cooperative efforts. Okay, Kevin. So let's dive into this reporting aspect. As all of you know, our water commissioners are doing everything they can to go out and visit as many structures as they can, as often as they can. But we all recognize that our water commissioners have big areas to cover and a lot of ditches to cover, and we have a short irrigation season. And not only that, our water commissioners, many of our water commissioners have systems that are on call every summer, and they're going to prioritize their time to assuring that they're administering those calls. So in order to get a best representative picture of the amount of water that's being diverted and how much is being diverted, even just in cubic feet per second, it's really critical that the water user collect data as well. And when we talk about collecting data, we're not asking you to collect daily flows. It is an option, as you can see there down below on my slides here. It is an option to install a recorder that would actually record data likely on 15-minute intervals. And as it's spelled out in our rules right now, it would be a recorder that does record on 15-minute intervals, which pretty much all recording devices do that anyhow nowadays. But, even having an idea of when you turn on, how much water was running through the ditch when you did turn on, and then capturing different variations of your flow, or if you adjust your head gate, capturing that data. And then of course, when you turn it off, let us know that you've turned it off and how much it was running when you turned it off. So we're not looking for a substantial amount of data, but certainly enough data to be really representative of how your ditch operated that particular year. As far as us getting that data, we can collect data in just about any way. That data can be submitted to myself, the division engineer's office, or directly to the water commissioner. And that can be in the form of an email or just mail to us, or even when you're out in the field and you've made an adjustment to your head gate and you've gone to your flume, text your water commissioner right there and then, and let him or her know that you've made an adjustment or turn the ditch on or off. And then we do have a web interface option as well. So if there's individuals that are interested in entering the data through a web interface, just contact your water commissioner and we can set up a web interface for you. All right, Kevin, I'll let you take it over.
All right. Thanks, Erin. And again, this is a good time to pause. I see several chats that I haven't looked at, but this is a good time to see whether we have any questions. And
Kevin, we do have one question. We've got a water user that asked if the state will be reimbursing them for their time for reporting on their water use, and they are asking who will be paying for the meters.
And no, the state, we're not going to pay anyone to report the data. That's your data. The importance of it, we're hoping, is evident, and so it's a need and it can be a requirement. We would not pay for that, nor for the equipment. We've talked with some of the groups about potential grant programs, or not potential, but grant programs that are out there if somebody cannot, if somebody needs to have access to that. So the question of who's paying for all this, then the water user pays for the measurement method, but there may be grants available for that.
And Kevin, something we've mentioned in our other meetings is, and this might be helpful for people to understand, is that What people own is a right to use water, and the waters belong to the people of the state. And so it's referred to as a usufructuary right. And so you have a right to really use something that belongs to others. And with that comes some obligation to measure and record your water usage.
Yeah. There's a couple other questions, Kelly, in the chat. Did we get to things?
There were some questions about the boundaries of Division 6 and do they incorporate the White River, but I think we were able to address those in the chat.
Okay.
And then it looks like we just got one new question. It'd be helpful to have specific standards and specifications on the measuring devices, especially the Flumes. Sounds like there's a lot of confusion about how to read measurements and how the Flumes should be installed.
Erin, could you talk about some of the material you've already distributed even before the rules on and I think we've talked about how not necessarily through the rules, but we can make available other guidance on installation and on reading and reporting and that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. Available on our website, we do have a functional standard measuring device and headgate functional standard that's very helpful on giving some guidance on how to install these and what's expected with headgates and measuring devices. And then, I'm sorry, my dog is barking. Then we also have a little brochure, if you will, of how to record your data and report your data. And then we also have forms that you can fill out. They're PDF fillable forms, all available on our website. And that's if you go to our website, the DWR website, and then go to the Division 6 portion of that website, you'll find all of that information.
And then Kevin, we got a couple other questions. One is, will the presentation slides be available online? I will provide a link in the chat to where we will save those slides. Another question, would a reservoir pond staff gauge be considered a measurement device or a measurement method since it would require a calculation to determine storage volume? That question comes from Matt Luce.
I think, Matt, that we would call that a measuring device. It is a direct measurement. Yes, it's going to take some calculation, a stage volume curve or a stage volume calculation to determine the amount. But and I think in the end, we really don't, we use that terminology to just distinguish a couple things. But I think in that case, we'd call it a measuring device. It's going to directly measure the elevation.
I would look at it as very similar to a partial flume where you have a staff gauge on the side, you read the staff gauge, and then there is a conversion chart that you would use to determine how much water is actually flowing through the flume at that time. So I would see a staff gauge in the pond as essentially similar. It has a different rating table, a stage capacity table, but that's the way I would look at that.
Okay, thank you.
I can see that Jeff has a question. Where can we find the most current version of the proposed rules? If you go to our main webpage, you'll find a topic called Division 6 Measurement Rules. Click on that. And then there's a list of about 5 items. Click on the very bottom item, and that will take you to our rules page. There'll be a Division 6 pull down. You can open that, and you'll have all the documents we have put out there, including today's draft of the rules.
Thanks for that, Mike.
I know that because I went there a little while ago, just to be sure I could repeat that when it came up.
I just want to mention that I'm just scanning the chat and I see several questions related to statutory authority to require measurement and when this would be necessary, is it even allowed? And I'm going to suggest that we might be able to just have some conversation on that further into this as we go through the rules themselves. And actually, because I'm seeing a lot of chats that target certain issues here and there, but a broader conversation might be helpful for the people with the questions. Is that all right? Does that sound good to people?
I think it does, Kevin. I would just offer some clarification as to whether these rules apply or only apply if there's a call on the river.
Yeah, and we've talked about the advantages of and the need to have measurement when there is a call, but we're not being selective that we will only require measuring devices if there is a call. These measuring devices are broadly for water administration, for important data, etc., not entirely contingent on a call. And with that, maybe I will bring up the rules. Mike and Aaron, shall we do that?
Yes, I think that's the right thing to do now.
Bear with me as I oh, sorry. Here we go. I think this is what I'm after. Are you just seeing a photo there, or are you seeing?
I see the 18.2 and 18.3, and you're scrolling.
Okay,
Okay.
good. Very good. With that, let me. Okay, well, let's just launch into that. And again, if you have specific questions when we are on a portion of this, jump right in. If I skip over something that you've read about, then interrupt and we'll go back, because I'm going to start actually at 18.3 as we have in our stakeholder meetings. And the point of 18.3 is importantly to talk about the scope and purpose of the rules, but really to identify exceptions to the rules. And so we've advanced this a little bit since we had the stakeholder meetings, but I'm just going to go through those and see whether there's any questions, because it makes a good point. And we need to remember, these are exceptions to the measurement rules. They are not necessarily exceptions to administration. But number one, permitted or unregistered wells that operate pursuant to a section of the statute. Basically, that's domestic type wells in number one. Number two is one that we spent a lot of time on: ponds that fill during spring runoff and are not situated on a stream or filled by a diversion from a stream. And really what we're trying to capture there is a lot of concern or a lot of interest in livestock ponds. And I don't mean livestock water tanks that or erosion control dams that we have in the statutes, but just ponds that either they've been excavated or dammed up, but they really don't fill from a diversion from the stream. They're not on a stream, they don't dam up the stream, but they just kind of incidentally or opportunistically collect runoff during the spring when there's not a call. And so we've seen that as, to get to the point, it's more of a livestock use that we normally wouldn't measure if it were from a typical exempt well. We're really working on trying to capture the need there. And again, I'll keep talking, but I'm very open to somebody jumping right in. And Mike and Aaron, please watch me and add to what I'm saying if I'm missing something. A good one, number three, head stabilization ponds that are used for irrigation. Number four, again, this is surface water diversions, including springs, for what we would call those typical domestic uses. And again, the idea is if it were a well, we would not put a meter on that type of well. And we're looking at probably the most effective use of these devices is to not put them on those types of diversions. 5 and 6, we list livestock water tanks and erosion control dams allowed by statute. And of course, Aaron and the division engineers can administer those, but we don't normally measure those. And then finally, if we have an inactive diversion that the division engineers certified it's inactive, then we would not be doing measurement on that. Any questions from anyone?
Kevin, looks like Andy Rossi has a question.
Andy, please jump in.
Thanks, Kevin. My question is on this section, 18.3 and 18.4. Not so much what you have in there, and I appreciate you guys have been doing some work to refine both of these sections. But at the few meetings I've been to so far, we haven't quite gotten to the point where we're tackling the subject of in-channel water rights, both recreational in-channel diversion and in-stream flows. By my reading of the revised statutes, the in-channel diversion requires both a structure and measuring. And so the follow-up question there would be, what type of data is the state requiring for in-channel diversions? And then there are some instances in the revised statutes that in-stream flows require both measurement and data recording. So have you guys pondered any of that as far as inclusion of those two types of water rights in these rules? Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. And Mike and Aaron, I'll let you jump in too, but we do have that responsibility to have measurement in place in the stream for those in-channel water rights. And that's really so Aaron can administer it. Certainly if we're going to be calling out a water right upstream for an in-stream use, then it goes back to what Mike was talking about. It's just a specialized version of what Mike was talking about. So we need that measurement on the stream, and I would put that more in the realm of a stream gauge, even though it's also a measuring device. But then when it comes to data recording, reporting, Andy, I think we'd want to maybe think through that answer a little bit more. But when we talk about the value of data earlier on, it's really to protect the value of the water right for the water user. And I think if the in-stream flow right is placing a call and measuring the flow rate, then that record is there, that protection is there. When we talk about data toward putting Colorado in the best possible position for a compact compliance obligation, then we're outside that realm of consumptive use that I think the Upper Colorado River Commission would be considering. So it's something we probably need to, we need to write down, but I think the data requirements are a little bit different for that non-consumptive in-stream use. And with that, Mike and Aaron, did I miss something, or do you have a better take on that?
No, I think you covered it there.
Okay.
Kevin, we're still
Sorry.
just getting a few questions, just clarifying whether measuring devices are needed only if a system's on call or not. There might still be some confusion around that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Kevin, I believe this gentleman's located quite far down on the White River, close to the port.
Okay. I want to give you the first of all, the black and white answer, just to be clear. And these rules are not premised on administration only when there's a call. The rules, the value of the rules, among other things, helps and is important if there is administration of a call. So we need to remember that, but also there are significant holes in our data on the West Slope. Those are critical holes that make it more difficult for us to represent Colorado's use in a compact compliance obligation situation. So the value of the rules goes beyond just administration, and the rules are, to be clear, once again, the rules are applicable in all cases, not just when there's a call on the river.
Kevin, if I could jump in a little bit on the compact end of things, the Colorado River Compact the Upper Colorado River Compact Commission will look back at 10 years of previous use by each of the states to determine if any state has overused the amount of water that they're allocated under the Upper Colorado River Compact. If we don't have good numbers, then they're going to come up with some numbers. The best way we can defend ourselves is to have those diversions available so that we can show that we have not over diverted, or what we have actually diverted and consumed. And then when it comes to a curtailment, the UCRC can tell us if we've overused, how much we have to pay back, because there is a payback provision. And if there is a curtailment, we need to have the measurement in place at the time in order to affect the curtailment that needs to occur. So trying to jump in and put a device in at the last minute doesn't help us when they're looking back 10 years for the information on how much water has been diverted and consumed by Colorado. Doesn't help anybody. They may overcalculate how much water we have consumed and make us pay back more, which is not something we want to do to any of our Colorado citizens. We want to make sure that we give them the right answer, not an answer that's too big.
Thanks, Mike. That's a really good addition. Andy, I hope that I gave you a satisfactory answer for tonight, but I do think it's something that would be helpful to call out in the rules. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I know it's sort of a limited format, but I agree. I think the way your rules read right now, some of those in-channel diversions are subject to these rules. And without sort of a clarification of what sort of data those special diversions need, you're a little lacking here in the text. Thanks.
Great. Thanks.
Kevin, I mean, Andy, just for clarification on that, when you talk about in-channel diversions, I don't know if you view an in-stream flow water right as an in-channel diversion, where a recreational in-channel diversion has been defined by statute as a diversion because of the infrastructure they've put in the river to create the recreational experience. And you're right, though those aren't specifically called out. We do talk about surface water diversions and these rules applying to surface water diversions, and a RISIT, or recreational channel diversion, from my perspective, qualifies as a surface water diversion. And yes, you're correct. That's not specifically spelled out as a RISIT being included under surface water diversion. I know, speaking just for our recreational in-channel diversion here in Steamboat, their decree actually required the measuring device, and so the measuring device is in place today.
Yeah, Aaron, I agree with all that. I was just wondering what data are they submitting to you? Is it just that the minimum flow is recorded and passed through there? Because it's, you're not establishing these rules and then proceeding on through the abandonment determination. It's not made on whether or not someone has placed a call. It's if they've diverted a certain amount of water. So my question is, since they're kind of special cases, what is the flow that has to be recorded at a RISIT?
Well, obviously we rely on the USGS gauge that does record the data. We have created a structure ID for that measuring device. So we have a structure ID where all the water is recorded. Well, I don't think you can go to diversion records there, but you can access all the data through USGS.
So sorry to belabor this a little bit, but no one is actually submitting to this DWR any official records for those diversions. Is that correct?
Not for the recreational and channel diversion, no.
The way these rules read, they would need to do that. I believe. The water right holders of those in-channel diversions.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Thanks.
point well taken, Andy, thanks. Okay, I'm going to continue down section B. Just again, the one thing that does is points out why we're doing this, but also refers to statutory provisions that are already in statute. And we list those generally, Articles 84 and 92 of the statutes. And I expect in a basis and purpose document, we would document those in more detail, but it's maybe a little much for this rules document. And I'm going to go into definitions now. And during our presentation, that abridged presentation, we talked about this hierarchy, starting with number 9 here, measurement method. And that's, again, that general, it's a means to determine the flow rate, total volume, or volume of water stored. That's the general item. And then within the measurement methods, we could have a measuring device, which is one of those structures permanently installed. It measures directly the flow rate, total volume, or volume of water. And I guess we need to be careful with the term directly, because it's really measuring maybe the number on a staff gauge that we can go to a table. But I just want to, again, distinguish it from that energy used or power used, one or the other, or some other indirect method of measuring flow. So we put, those are all 3 new or improved definitions in 18.4. And I hope that's helpful that we've gone through that, those new definitions. And that's what I'm going to say about definitions for now, unless there are any questions. Let me just make sure there wasn't another one.
Kevin, we did have one question about, does DWR have a list of approved meters, or I think the term was electrical devices for pumps?
Okay, and you said electrical devices?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I think let me just answer that more broadly. When we talk about flumes and weirs, we're likely going to have a manufactured structure, or a structure that can be constructed by the water user to certain specifications that they use a table. And so in that sense, that's probably the best way for that to happen with weirs and flumes. And then that becomes acceptable. When we talk about flow meters, well, flow meters do what they do. They measure flow. So, that should be acceptable. Again, we're talking about rated devices from the manufacturer properly installed. But those fall into that measuring devices category. When we get into alternative measurement methods, then it becomes more of it's going to be difficult for us to list what's acceptable. We're going to need, as we see later in the rules, for the water user to develop the assumptions and the predictable field conditions and how the calculations will work, so that the division engineer can reliably say, yes, that will be within the accuracy standards of these rules. So I kind of circled around indirectly. I hope that helped.
Kevin, there is one question, if you don't mind answering it right now. Somebody's asking about how they have flumes for their larger ditches, but they were having a tough time finding one for a smaller half CFS diversion. If anybody has some guidance there.
Yeah, and I can answer that, or Aaron, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I would guess I would suggest one option would be, especially if your ditch has enough fall to it, For small flows like that, V-notch weirs work very well. And though I can't say, I know of anybody that actually makes V-notch weirs, it's possible you can just make that V-notch weir out of material on your ranch. But that definitely would be an option, which is to install a V-notch weir. But those weirs do require a little bit more follow to your ditch.
Thanks, Aaron. One other comment on that, we talked about accuracy standards, and we'll be hitting on that in just a minute. But when we get to these very small diversions, smaller water rights that are going to have smaller flumes, then the plus or minus 5% may not necessarily be applicable. We may use an absolute amount, and I'll explain that more when we get there. I do want to stop on number 16 here, verification, because that's a term that also has created a little confusion in stakeholder meetings. And I would sum that up as we scroll further down in the rules. We'll talk about this too, but I would sum that up by saying verification is going to be important for devices that wear out. For example, a flow meter, where it can be installed and it operates properly, but due to wear and tear, it may become inaccurate over time. But verification for a properly installed, properly rated flume is not really an issue. If it's properly rated and properly installed and the water commissioner can see that, then we don't need to go out and verify its accuracy. That's a broad statement. There may be exceptions to that, but that's the way we look at that, the point of verification. I'm going to go to section 18.6, measurement methods and recording requirements. And I want to make one point. Let's see. We do talk about all diversion structures within the scope of these rules need to be equipped with a measuring device or alternative measurement method. And I want to point out that one of the conditions is that it needs to be approved by the division engineer. And again, this gets us to the question of, well, how does approval occur? And when we talk about a properly rated and properly installed flume or weir, then that approval is probably going to happen in a fairly straightforward manner. If we're talking about power consumption coefficient methodologies, where field conditions may vary and you're using different calculations and relying, say, on the power company, then the approval will require more work by the division engineer, and maybe you'll have to give the division engineer more information to do that. But we did put that condition in there that it needs to be approved at some point.
Kevin, this might be an opportunity to jump in with another question I saw come up, what defines a qualified tester and who is available for this?
Yes. So we do have qualified tester as definition number 12. And I'm going to say, Mike, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but qualified tester is really almost always going to be flow meters or totalizing flow meters, inline meters, where that's a very specific skills, specific qualifications. And so we're going to need someone like that. But the good news is that that's going to be for a very small number of the diversions in Division 6.
I would mention that we have measurement rules in 4 areas of the state that deal mostly with groundwater and meters on groundwater type systems. And in those areas, we have qualified testers who have gone through a course with the division. It didn't cost them anything to do it. They've showed that they have the skills and the ability to do it, and we give them a certificate that says they're a qualified tester. So we do have those folks in the state. We don't see a lot of need at this point in Division 6. But you know, if we do, then we'll try and get that program staffed up in this area also. So.
Yeah. Okay.
And Kevin, now that I've completely ruined your flow, I do see a gentleman that has his hand up. It's Walt.
Yes.
I-
This is
Go ahead.
Walt Proctor and Meeker. I have a question on the last part of this. It says wasteway downstream of the measuring device. I know several cases where the wasteway is upstream of the measuring device. It works very well for reducing the flow to a desired level in the measuring device, and it works fantastically for dumping water to allow you to clear floods, beaver dams, or growth that are interfering with the measuring device. Why are we specifying downstream? The water commissioner should be able to look at a wasteway either upstream or downstream and determine if it's adequate.
If I can take a shot at that, Kevin, I think, Mr. Proctor, that if the wasteway is downstream of the measuring device, then arguably there's either too much water going through the measuring device, or if they're actually getting their decreed water right, then they're wasting some of it downstream. I don't think anybody wants to waste it, so that if someone tries, needs to take 6 feet for their 4-foot water right and then dump 2 out of the wasteway, we would need to show that the 2 was going out of the wasteway. If the wasteway is upstream, that's a great way to manage the flow at the flume. And I agree with you there.
That's all I'm getting at. The upstream works fantastically for setting the flume where you want it.
It's a very good way to do it.
Walt, I was going to mention that we just happened to be in Meeker a few weeks ago, and we saw a significant diversion where the wasteway was upstream of the measuring devices, so upstream of the flume. So I think that's just a correction we can make in the rules.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing it up.
Kevin, sorry if you don't mind answering one more question before moving on.
Sure.
So there's a question in the chat. Can my water commissioner verify my partial flume early in the spring, at least to observe and make sure that my measuring device is working correctly?
And Glinda, this is more of a specific question. You have a measuring device now, and you're asking, could you get that specific device measured this coming spring? It's not a hypothetical, could the rules allow for this? Is that right? And Aaron, maybe you can answer that. I think if the question is, someone's got a specific device that they're asking. Okay, she answered yes. And so Aaron, I think that's just a question of Glinda could contact her water commissioner and probably address that need this spring, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. Good question.
Well, and Kevin, this is Sarah. I know that with Glenda, that's something that I do with them every year as I go up there in the spring. And I think water commissioners can do this for a lot of people, is say, hey, I've checked it. It looks like it's doing great. Or, once we start noticing things as water commissioners, we should really be notifying water users if we're finding flumes not working correctly.
Thanks, Aaron. That helps. Okay. Kelly, just keep interrupting me as you need to. I'm going to go ahead to the top of page 5, measurement method, functional standard. And one thing I want to point out is that we do break this down, just for clarity, that a measuring device or an alternative measurement method may be measuring flow rate or total volume or both. It's just going to depend on the application. We're so accustomed in the other divisions Mike mentioned to measuring total flow over a season because of augmentation plans or replacement plans. That's likely not going to be appropriate or necessary in many applications in Division 6. So we're just we're just allowing for, it'll be case by case. And I think most of the times, Aaron, it's going to be flow rate, but that may vary. I'll also highlight number 2. We talk about the accuracy standard of plus or minus 5%. And then we, as I had mentioned earlier, for small diversions, that half CFS diversion, plus or minus 5% is a very small number, and it may be more appropriate and more achievable by the water user to have a threshold amount instead of a percentage. But you know, whether that's 0.1 CFS, for example, that could be the standard. So we're working on that thought right now. Any questions on that? Okay, I'm going to scroll down to B at nearly the top of page 6. And I just want to point out, it's important for us to recognize that these rules need to be, they need to cover all possible circumstances. And when we talk about a recording device, may be required, it might be a water court decree or terms and conditions of a well permit, may be somehow reasonably required. But again, Aaron, I think the majority of your diversions, recording device is not going to be necessary, not going to be appropriate, but it'll be case by case. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. The bottom of page 6, measurement method verification. Again, I just want to reinforce the fact that verification is usually going to be in a flow meter or some device that can wear. Certainly power consumption coefficient could fall into that too, but it's not going to apply to flumes and weirs that are properly installed. And I'll just go right up to the top of page 7. Alternative measurement methods shall be rated or verified. We need to fill in what that frequency might be. We'll define a frequency for verification, but again, it's those devices that are subject to verification because they may wear over time or come out of adjustment over time or whatever that might be. Okay, 18.7 A1. I want to spend a little time on this. We got a good question from one of our from an attorney, an outside attorney today on this. And I want to read the first part of number 1. For the purpose of obtaining approval of the use of a measurement method and in compliance with the phase-in provisions, the water user of a pre-existing measurement method, newly installed or reinstalled measurement method, or a changed measurement method shall provide notice to the division engineer. And that's certain information and on a form. And I want to be careful. I think we misstated this and probably needed to think this through a little more, but for a pre-existing measurement method, I will suggest, Aaron, if you're comfortable with this, that if we have a measuring device that's properly installed, that the water commissioner has seen, like Sarah was just talking about, and it works, and we've got it in our database, that we don't need new information submitted to get approval of that. It will be for the newly installed, reinstalled, or changed devices. But Aaron, and I think what goes hand in hand with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to comment, Aaron, but there's also the question about what about that measuring device that's been in place and the water commissioner has accepted? Are these rules going to then overturn that and require a new installation? And I don't think we can say this is 100% guaranteed, but I believe the concept of these rules is that if you have a device that the water commissioner has accepted and approved, these rules aren't intended to provide anything more stringent that would cause you to redo that. Aaron, would you want to comment on that further, those points?
Everything you said, Kevin, is correct in what we've discussed. The only thing I would add is the key to the water commissioner approval. It is possible that the water commissioner would come out and find that a flume is submerged, and at which time the person would have to do something with that submerged flume. Understanding that sometimes a submerged flume can be fixed by simply cleaning a ditch. In other instances, it might require the flume to be raised up a little bit. So there's kind of a two-part component where you've installed the measuring device and the water commissioner has approved it.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, and to the attorney that contacted us today, thank you for raising that. And I think we probably will edit 18.7A1 to clarify that on the pre-existing measurement method. I'll go to 18.8, data recording and submission. I'll just highlight the second sentence, or the first two sentences, and that we say the diversions will be recorded by the water commissioner or the water user, and that the division engineer in cooperation with the water user will determine each of their responsibilities. And really what we're saying there is that this is going to vary from district to district, diversion to diversion, to ensure we get the threshold amount of data. It may be that the water user needs to go out and do some of that recording. It may be that the water commissioner can, in some cases, do that. But again, that will be a case-by-case, water right by water right agreement or determination between the water commissioner and the water user to determine how we're going to make sure we at least get the threshold amount of information. And I'm speaking again for our Division 6 staff. So I always like to check in, Aaron or Brian, if you have any further comment on that. By the way, I should say Brian Romig from Division 6 is also in the call and has been helpful.
Kevin, too, I'll just note that Andy Rossi has a question.
Andy, go ahead.
Thanks, Kelly. It's my last question, I promise. You know, you put some flexibility in 18.8 here, and I think it'd probably be nice for all layers of water users to have a statement in here that reads something to the effect that either the division engineer or the water commissioner would provide written verification that the data or the records have been received by the division engineer and accepted as official. I could think of a lot of different ways where, you know, there could be an assumption of everything's going along pretty smoothly, and then you see, you know, a water right pop up on an abandonment list that you thought was being, you know, well cared for from a data recording standpoint. I think it would be a nice thing to see just for a lot of different reasons. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. And I'll ask both you and Aaron at the same time. Would you see that as one more sentence added to the end of 18.8 that says well, that has to do with the year-end information, but a sentence that says the water commissioner or the division engineer will verify receipt of the data?
I think it would be receipt and acceptance of the data, right, Andy? I mean, that seems to be a real challenge where someone might send in data that we feel like either needs additional information or we don't find it acceptable. And it's really critical for our staff, which I know my staff does, but it is really critical that we communicate that with the water users so they understand, you know, what we need.
Yes, that's exactly right, Aaron. Thanks. That acceptance is, I think, important because someone may send you who knows what and just assume they're good to go.
Good comment, Andy. Thanks.
Thanks.
I'll just mention for 18.9 non-compliance, we'll add some more legal type language here, but this is just really to lay out again some of the statutory basis for requiring this and taking enforcement action if necessary to implement the existing statutory authority. And with that, I'll jump down to another item that we left blank and just put a placeholder in italics, and that's under 18.12. And Mike, I know that you have a lot of good language that's been accepted in other rules. We didn't put all that detail in now, but could you say something about 18.12?
Yeah, 18.12 is designed, is basically a section where we would point to our administrative procedures rules, which are under CCR 402-5. There's a section in there where someone can appeal a decision, an agency decision, or a decision of someone in the agency. They can appeal that to the state engineer. So that would be where we would talk about that process. But here we are writing rules, and then we're talking about another set of rules. So we're kind of going back and forth on how we address that. But what we were trying to do is say if someone has a concern with what they've been ordered to do, there is a process going forward where they can appeal to the state engineer, and then if they're unhappy with that, there is then again the appeal to the court system. So it just lets people know that it's not, if they get an order that they're concerned about, they can have someone review that and make a reading on it as final agency action. And then if that's still not acceptable, there's still recourse to the courts. So it's not a final answer if there's a concern with an order or a determination that's made. So just trying to figure out how to put that in there without getting into conflict with the procedural rules as they're written. So the attorneys have it.
Thanks, Mike.
Short way of saying it.
Yes.
Kev-
Kern, sorry, Kelly, Kern, can I go back? We missed a question you had on 18.8. And I'm thinking maybe you're not able to unmute. Is that true? Do you want to put it in the chat?
You might be on the phone. Is it *6 to unmute yourself with a phone? There.
Hi. Thank you, Erin. Yeah, sorry about that. I was still on double mute, I guess. I just had a question about 18.8 that came up during our stakeholder meeting, and it still has language in there that sounds like if the water user does not report that they would be in violation of the rules. And I just wanted to make sure that that language can be either changed or updated so that it's not necessarily a shall report, but what we talked about during our stakeholder meeting for the water users reporting process.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Kern. I think we missed that. I think we can be a little more sophisticated with the language. Mike and Aaron, do you agree?
Yeah, I think what we were trying to say there is that when data is collected, this is how you report it, not necessarily that there's this shall obligation, but trying to point to the method by which, we need to have the data by a certain time so that we can get it into our records for you. And that's kind of what we were trying to get to in that sentence. And I think the term shall is probably one we need to change or to clarify what we mean by that sentence.
Yeah.
I have it highlighted.
Kevin, there's like one question's a little more general. Do you want to wait till you get through the rule draft before we answer those more general questions?
Sure. Yeah, and we're getting really close anyway, so the timing is good. Because I only have one more thing. And that is if we go to 18.16, I think Mike, you got done with 18.12, 18.16, the phase in. And this is probably what I want to call the reality rule. We can't make these rules effective on a certain date and have Aaron and a lot of commissioners out there the next day and have everyone necessarily in compliance. And so the approach we decided on was to allow through the rules Aaron to develop a schedule for dates of installation. It would probably be based on geographic area, but it may also be based on the type of diversion. And that would allow, I think, Aaron to get the biggest bang for the buck, you know, focus on areas where it's most likely that we can have success and get the larger number of diversions or for the type of diversion, but also do it in a way that allows her and her water commissioners to verify that, sorry, different use of the word verify than I used before, but ensure that those devices are in place. So that was a little long-winded, and I don't think I did a good job of that, but it's really allowing her to set implementation dates for these rules. So I'd welcome any thoughts or comments on that. And with that, Kelly, do you want to bring up that general question? We can talk about it and then just open up the floor to any questions that people have.
Yeah, that sounds great, Kevin. So we got kind of a longer question from Jim Dumler, asking, all these rules are providing for activities on lands that aren't necessarily owned by the ditch companies or owners. In a lot of cases, head gates, diversion structures are on lands that the ditch company doesn't own. A member of the ditch is not the landowner. What rules do the landowners have to make sure that work done in providing proper measurement and changes to the requirements, et cetera, meet the requirements and specifications of the landowner, including accessing for stream work, cleaning up, not disturbing lands, providing notice for access, and that the landowner is approving the proposed modifications to a diversion or wasteway. What are the rules that landowners have?
And Mike, I'm happy to take that, or you can take it.
I'll let you take that one.
Well, and I think, there's two things. It seems like the question falls into the realm of also routine ditch maintenance and access to the ditch. And the statutes set out the rights of the ditch rights of the ditch company or the ditch owner to access the ditch for those purposes. But I think, we always like to see that they're working together. The ditch company and the landowners are working together to minimize impacts and to communicate. And I want to make sure I didn't oversimplify the question, but I think for installation of measuring devices, it would be those same statutes that control and the same need for people to work together and communicate well. And I hope that answered the question for Jim, but please follow up if it didn't.
No, I'll just add that if your structure is located on the U.S. Forest Service ground, make sure that you do what's necessary under your permit with them.
Well, Kelly, I'm going to pause and let people continue to consider questions or comments. But I think an important part of our agenda that I didn't really plan, but we should talk about is what's going to happen after tonight. Because we did do 6 different stakeholder meetings. For those of you that don't know, Steamboat, Oak Creek, Rangeley, Meeker, Walden, Craig, and we got to talk to a lot of people, and we learned a lot when we were out there. And hopefully some of you can see the way these rules have grown and gotten better and more helpful as we've done that. And the question is, what would we do next? And I think we've got so much information that we really want to take a broad look at these rules again, take the information we got tonight, and then make sure we have them in a form that we believe they can go to the Secretary of State. And Mike has done a good job in the past talking about the process, but I'm going to say in general, this APA rulemaking process directs that we would file a version of these rules that we believe is pretty close to final with the Secretary of State. And then there are steps along the way that include continued stakeholder discussion to make sure we have all the issues resolved, and then eventually, other steps. But then there's a hearing, and then everything needs to go through the attorneys and make sure it's constitutional, and we've checked all the boxes to where we can have final rules. Mike has described just that process between when we file with the Secretary of State and get complete as being a minimum of 4 months. I will say that we would hope within the next 2 or 3 months, we have something that we can file with the Secretary of State, and do it with the confidence that we've addressed a lot of the questions and we have rules that will work for everyone and are fair and Aaron can implement. But that's what the future, the short-term future on this looks like. And I would even say, Mike and Aaron, as we work on these over the next few months, I think we would touch base with those people that have signed up on the notification list and others that have an interest in this. So with that, Kelly, what other questions do you see?
So Matt Luce has his hand up. Good to get a question.
Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, I just had I guess maybe a couple, I think pretty quick questions. One was, we were in the discussion, there was talk of, for example, the verification is really applicable more to a meter than a partial flume. Some of the requirements, they're not really applicable to an in-channel non-consumptive water right. And I was wondering if there'd been any thought to, within the structure of the rules, almost kind of identifying these requirements really apply, almost kind of by type of structure or by type of use or something like that. Like these really apply, because I think these rules are so broad in that they apply to surface diversions and groundwater diversions, all kinds of different diversions. I don't know if there's any way of almost like a structuring that these rules apply to these types of structures, these rules apply to these types. Just this is a thought.
Matt, I wonder, as a middle ground in certain relevant rules, whether there would be a parenthetical, for example, or usually found in, or usually applying to, that sort of thing.
I think so. I just, I guess maybe kind of my thought was it would I think we wouldn't want people that have flumes all of a sudden have to have verification because it wasn't clear in the rules that really applies more to a meter. That was just kind of I guess more the concern I had just in the reading of it.
Matt, if I can, along with the set of rules, we will file a statement of basis and purpose that kind of lays out those issues. It lays out why we're doing it, why, where verification would be applied more to those mechanical type devices where a flume is probably not going to see that kind of wear that would require verification. So we lay that out in that statement of basis and purpose, which is basically the reference guide for the rules. Rather than
okay.
try and freight the rules with a really messy technical dissertation on those things, we put them in that statement. I think it would satisfy you if we have them there.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that'll kind of be with the filing of the
Yeah.
rules that will, okay.
Yes, that gets filed along with the set of rules.
Oh, okay. I mean, then just the other really quick question I had was just, with the, I think there's language in there about, measuring for the fully anticipated rate of flows. And I guess I was kind of struggling a little bit with, certain measuring devices capture high flows real well, but they might not be quite as accurate at the low flows. If you have a large range of flows, is there any like preference? Is it more towards, we want to capture more of the discrete flows, we want to capture everything, and if that means multiple devices, that means multiple devices. I was just kind of curious where that kind of might be going.
You're saying something like a water right or a ditch has a 30 CFS water right, and then maybe a very senior 1 CFS water right. You want to make sure you don't have an oversized flume.
Or it has a 30 CFS water right. It sometimes sees 30 CFS, at other times it sees a half a CFS.
Yeah, I can see where that could be an issue. I know that ramp flumes are designed to cover a very large range of flows. But there may be times when, maybe there just needs to be a smaller flume located in there too, maybe more cost effective or something like that. So I think we can work with folks to make sure that whatever gets in will capture their diversions for them, so that we can accurately say, yes, they got their water, they got their 30 CFS, or they are the senior and they got their 1 CFS or half CFS.
Okay. Thank you.
Dave Bauer, you had a good question. And Kelly, can I ask, are we set up to capture all the chats? I'm sure you're going to do that.
I hope so. I know that they're recorded, but
Okay.
Dave Bauer also knows how to find us if he wants to submit those comments directly. It might be good just to summarize them, Kevin.
Yeah, and Dave, I think you had a good question. One thing that we became more in tune with was the number of pumped diversions, direct flow diversions off the river, especially on the lower reach of the White and the Yampa. And it sounds like you've got a couple other special cases of that. And I think we'd like to be able to look at that and make sure we're doing it well. You're okay probably if we don't try to answer that all right now.
Yeah, and I think Dave Bauer was actually referring to like bigger diversions that are pumped like snowmaking lines that would be in the upper. So
Right. Karen asked the question about near surface structures and small springs. Karen, when I described exceptions for springs, we talked about those that are similar to domestic uses where we don't currently measure those. And Mike, I think we've talked about the fact that we might have some, in a compact compliance situation, we might have some standard figures we can use for domestic type uses. So, but Karen, just a smaller diversion from a spring, I'm not sure we have a good basis for accepting those from the measurement rules at this point. But if you want to provide more information on that question, you certainly can.
Kevin, too, we just got a comment from someone saying that they'd like to see provision for landowners with water rights who are part of a ditch company to ensure the ditch company supplying records. And just that after this water user submits the records, or after water user submits records for their own use, they're told that the ditch company will be reporting the usage. And she's wondering if this is correct, or should the individual water right holder submit their own records?
And Mike or Aaron, help me with this. Are we talking about a mutual ditch company situation where the individual shareholder might be measuring and how they would interact with the ditch company? And let me just shortcut that real quickly, because by saying that for the water right, which in that case would be at the head gate at the river, that's the measurement we need. And then individual shareholders down ditch, we would not be looking for data from them or necessarily measurement from them, other than to whatever extent that the ditch company and the ditch users might want to do, but that would not be part of the rules. Did I understand that question correctly?
I think so. That's how I would have answered it, Kevin.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm not seeing any more questions at this point, just some various comments.
Well, this is a good time. Mike Sullivan has generously put himself out there to take comments by email. And I think that it's helpful to people if you can take another look at the rules after we've talked tonight and think about what your lingering questions are. You might have a question tomorrow. And Mike's email address is mike.sullivan, just as you would expect, mike.sullivan@state.co.us. And you can go to our website, and as we described earlier, and you can click on to sign up to the notification list. If you email Mike, you'll probably be put on the notification list for future updates on what we're doing with the rules.
And something I want to throw out there too, this is Sarah. Your water commissioner can be one of your best resources on your specific structure, your measuring device, how to turn in records, you know, what's kind of expected when it comes to records. So if you don't know who your water commissioner is, reach out to them, you know, call the division office in Steamboat to figure out who that is if you don't already know. They can really be a good resource or get you in touch with the right person that can give you correct information. So.
Thank you, Sarah. Perfect.
I just want to open up. We do have Katie and Emily on the line, and make sure they don't have any thoughts or comments to share, or Aaron, any of your staff that might have seen or heard something that they want to clarify or mention.
Nope. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay. Well, thank you. And this has been, again, really helpful. We really appreciate people joining in and participating and giving us good constructive input. That's so helpful to us. I hope we've shown that we've listened to that and responded to that. We'll continue to do that. And if there are no other questions, I'll just say you'll be hearing from us with updates if you've signed up. And if you haven't signed up and you want to, email Mike Sullivan or go to the website and sign up. Is there anything else?
I'll just know if you all can take a look. I just posted in the chat a link to a fact sheet on the measurement rules rulemaking for Division 6, which could be helpful.
Okay. Well, thank you all once again, and we'll close out the meeting. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you for attending.
Thanks, everyone.